Okay, we are back. Before we dive into our podcast, we wanted to give a little bit of a shout out to another podcast. Um, I had it and then I left it. Okay, it's gonna be one of those days. um, Anyway, we're back today. But before we dive into our exciting topic of healing the inner child, I wanted to give a little bit of a shout out. There's a podcast that you guys might find helpful for anyone navigating the teen years. It's a podcast called Talking with Teens. In each episode, Andy invites different experts to dive into different topics like parenting, mental health, and communication with teens. Um, what I guess stands out about this podcast for us is it's pretty approachable, and some of the host and guest interactions can be really engaging. And they have a way of making some of those complex conversations feel pretty down to earth and relatable. So you can check them out if you're feeling like it. Otherwise, we're going to dive right on into our stuff today.
All right, off we go. Tiffany, I know this is something you're particularly passionate about. Talking a little bit more about childhood trauma and some of the pieces about it. I know you usually have a lot of things prepared. So, is there anything just as we're getting started today that you wanted to highlight?
Oh, all the things, all the things. I guess something to highlight is like being able to define um, kind of what some of those childhood wounds might look like. I think, yeah, I think that's kind of on my mind, but the rest, let's just roll with it. My notes are a little
Yeah,
scattered, so.
no, it's okay. I think it's something you and I talk about all the time, doing different things. So, I think one of the things today is that people can. Um, is that people really focus a little bit, I think, on two fronts. One is glorifying childhood trauma, that children are so amazing, they're so tough, they're so resilient. Um, and they are, but I just want to start off by saying they shouldn't have to be. And so that's just one of the things where, like, whatever we're discussing today, the examples, like, we don't want to be glorifying childhood trauma. So the human spirit is amazing. It can heal and respond to things and post traumatic growth, but it would be much, much better in a world. Um, if there wasn't childhood trauma and there wasn't so much of it. And you really can't talk about childhood trauma without talking about the adults who experience those things, and a lot of them face severe mental health illnesses, struggle with addictions, or are faced with many other challenges. So I just want to throw that out as we're getting started today.
Yeah. Um, so I guess my brain wants to dive too far in too fast. Um, just something to keep in mind though, like as we're processing through this, we're gonna be kind of looking more at like what the inner child is. Um, I know some people kind of view it like as a metaphor, but it's kind of more that emotional memory like of your younger self. That kind of like past version of you that kind of holds on to the unmet need to feel seen, frozen grief of not being protected, the joy and imagination that like have been lost along the way for some
Mhm.
people. Not all people lose their creativity and imagination. Like that part of you is still there. Like that childhood version of you is still there. It lives in your body, it lives in your nervous system, it's present in your current and ongoing relationships. You know, and I always, at least in the work that I do, I remind people when you're afraid or you're in a conflict, that's usually when that part will show up and it'll kind of revert back to some of those defense systems that work.
Yeah, and I
Um,
would say just on that note, Tiffany, like we want to have defense symptoms that work. And so I just like to point this out that sometimes, like if they never worked in the first place, they would not show up. And so just sometimes I think people see the aftermath of trauma, and I think we have a lot more empathy for like a little kid that just what and we'll have to just put some trigger warnings out. We're going to give some real examples of some traumas. So just if you're not wanting to hear that today, but I we just can't talk about this out here and make it zoomed out. If you're a child who just lost their home to a tornado, if you were in a car accident, if you just witnessed domestic violence or maybe were abused yourself, that's a trauma, and so how you respond to survive, whether that's by being very aggressive and being very, like, just pushing everyone's buttons, trying to get as much attention as possible. That comes from somewhere, and I think we have so much more empathy for kids. But even these days, not everybody has empathy for kids. But when we see adults with these symptoms, there is way less empathy, and there is not the same understanding. And so we talked a lot about trying to be trauma informed as businesses and healthcare providers. But I'll be telling you, when people are scrolling social media, I don't think they're always in a trauma informed mindset. I think they're like, oh, that person is just aggressive or rude and they're not maybe seeing what they went through.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, that is an extremely frustrating thing that I run into both professionally and personally when like we see individuals reacting what we might consider extreme. Um, we kind of like give them a harsher punishment than a child. Granted, there are some instances where I've seen people like give pretty like extreme consequences and like lack of understanding towards young adults and children when they're having big emotions. Um I find it really fascinating that we live in a generation like with gentle parenting, but it also seems like some of us are taking that to the extreme of like we're being so overly gentle that we're not necessarily also like teaching appropriate emotional like regulation. Like it's one of those things where like we have to like it's not like our kids. Yes, they're breakable, but they're not like Humpty Dumpty. Like they still need a
Mm,
healthy balance of like appropriate emotional regulation, which they aren't going to be happy about or like.
no, you're right. You're right. People don't always know. And I think that they're not maybe always giving the nicest mindset to people or being as kind. So I do think there is some issues there with people being kinder to kiddos than adults and maybe seeing what that looks like for them.
Hmm. Yeah. I do wonder too, something that comes up like as we're talking about this and like quote unquote acceptable ways of expressing emotions. Like I know anger can be one of those that's pretty associated with like being acceptable male way to express
Mm.
emotions and express things and react. Um that's one I've always found pretty curious in terms of like it does get flack, but it's also like it feels like one of those childhood responses that, like, is allowed to go through into adulthood, and we don't seem to, like, address it in the same way we would a different emotion that's cropping up. Like depression. I think of depression or sadness, people are like, "Oh, like, get over it or buck up," versus, like, if someone's being angry, it's just like, "Oh, well, that's just the way they are."
Yeah, I mean it looks way I think it just looks a lot nicer, of a kid being, "Oh, I'm resource guarding because I've been through a lot of things," or, like, there's just more understanding, but yeah, like, they grow up to be adults and adults with issues that show up, like, as an adult, I mean and that would be more my niche, Tiffany, working with, like, men who have survived trauma and have experienced some different things, whether it be abuse or some of the things we're talking about, and yeah, it is difficult to maybe come to terms with that, and I'm not very athletic, but I am 6'5", and so, if I in junior high or high school, I'd get very emotional. Like, I wasn't as tall as I am now, but if I get that emotional as a 6'5" male who's in his 30s, like, I'm not gonna get that same reaction. So that's one of the conversations sometimes with some of my clients who are survivors is understanding how the world is seeing us sometimes, and that isn't always the easiest thing to admit. And the other piece being it's just difficult, I think, sometimes to allow ourselves to show some of those things. So I really am proud of any of my survivors of trauma, male or female or gender neutral, when they get to a place of wanting to work on some of their childhood trauma, because it can take years, or some people never will do that work. And so just recognizing how critical that is to be doing.
Yeah, yeah. Something I'm curious about, because I've encountered this quite often. Have you ever had someone who their core beliefs are so rooted in the facts that their childhood, the figures present in their childhood has told them they're a bad person, that that it that they struggle to wrap around this idea that they actually like are on a spectrum of personality and they aren't necessarily like good or bad.
Yeah, I mean, if you're supposed to have people who are pouring into you and they're poisoning the well, so to speak, that's gonna have an impact, or not be loving or supportive or not be present or a bit. I mean, there's lots of ways to hurt people, and that's why I think a lot of parents get scared or stressed, but also we grow up sometimes, and so, um, yeah, I do think there's so many ways we can be hurt or get hurt.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm sorry, Tiffany, I know I'm thinking I have so many clients that I've worked with this, currently working with, and so there's just no one set path. I mean, there are different paths to healing, but I'm just thinking through some of their journeys and, you know, some of them are, I mean, I just want to say, like, I think even the toughest people I know have these experiences, so I don't think not being able to move on is a toughness thing. It's just we don't get to pick what happens. And so, Tiffany, if you and I were driving out to lunch or something and we get in a car accident, you could be perfectly fine and maybe, get checked up on, and then the next day you're going about your day. And maybe for me, I can't get in the car for a while. Just because I'm struggling. And I don't think that would make you stronger than me and me weaker than you. It's just trauma impacts all of us very differently.
Mhm. Yeah. Are there any other topic points around like what the inner child is, what it looks like, how it shows up that you want to touch on before we kind of start diving into some of the techniques we've used, some of the ways people can like reconnect or even talk
Yeah.
about scratching the surface of their inner child?
Some of my first responder and veteran clients make fun of me when I bring up the inner child work because they think I'm becoming too much of a hipster or hippie therapist. But the just the quick pitch I would give about inner child work is just it's just experiences we've been through from a certain time frame. And you can carry some of those different memories and they can turn into different beliefs. So it's just kind of different seeds. Some seeds don't grow into anything, some do. And so for some people, those experiences can be very formative in some of the issues they're struggling with. I've done my own EMDR work, I've done my own healing work, and so something like it's very healed for me. But sometimes I used to feel like I didn't fit in or belong, not to say I fit in everywhere. But after doing some of that EMDR work, I was able to find some different memories where I didn't feel like I fit in. And so it sounds really silly, but one of the memories that was very palpable in the EMDR training was playing I Spy on the bus in kindergarten. And we were going on a field trip. And whoever this person was, they're a fine person. We're friends. But in this moment, they weren't letting me play. And I remember this other kid guessing what I had guessed. And they said, "Yeah, you got it," and me not. Now, does that mean I have PTSD from that? Absolutely not. But that one memory was very palpable that when I'm sitting there in therapy doing trauma work, I was able to place the first time I felt like that. And so it just primes me for some other memories. So that's something I'll talk about with some of my patients, like actually in their sessions of just like, hey, this is what we mean when we're talking about some of this. It doesn't mean that, I'm writing journals to myself. It can. It's just like, how can we work on it? So I know we're going to get more into those options, but I just wanted to give a real example of that, Tiffany, because sometimes I have people very resistant. But typically, my very resistant people have a reason they want to be very resistant to needing to do that work for that version of themselves. So I just most of the time they'll hear some of that vulnerability and hear what can work because I'm more comfortable sharing that than like, oh, this patient did this or this patient did that kind of thing.
Yeah. I am genuinely curious because I know you do EMDR work. Um, and I've encountered a couple individuals who like have went through EMDR, but they hated it. They hated the fact that there's no like they want a why. Like those people that want the why. And I'm curious
Mm.
as to like I've never done EMDR myself, but if I was someone considering it, like what would be kind of the reason you either do MDR or you don't do MDR?
Oh gosh, I feel like I could go on a lot of different direction. A lot of the time, I think it's based in preference for treatment. So I just want to, and it's so funny, Tiffany. I spoke at my alma mater. So if there's any Anderson University, Indiana alumni listening, like shout out to all five of us here. No, I'm just kidding. But I was speaking to some undergrads, and one of the students straight up asked me, and I loved it. He's like, "Hey, so I hate EMDR. It's not my favorite thing. It's not going super well." Um, so one of the things that they asked me was just like, "Hey, it's not for everyone. Why do you like it?" And so I just explained that like not every therapy treatment's for everyone, just like art therapy isn't or DBT. So some people, well, I need to be really careful. This is a very popular therapy, and so there's lots of trainings. So I just want to say a few things. Not every training is equal, so there's a big difference in levels of training. That
Yes.
is why I think a lot of my EMDR colleagues have gone on to get certified. um, so they're getting certified in EMDR, which is like a huge step with like many extra steps than just the initial training. Uh, just kind of show this. The other thing I would say is that not all clinicians are equal. So there are certainly EMDR clinicians greater than myself and others, but I will share that some of my patients have had some not so great EMDR therapists, and so then that has put them in a very strange spot where then they're showing up to do EMDR therapy thinking they've experienced it or maybe have not. So that's not to say that everyone that doesn't like EMDR just didn't have the right person, but I will say just because of how popular it is, there's a lot of people um, attempting to be in. I also think it's about like the right timing, and it is a very intense therapy. And so I think we don't want to scare people away from it, but we do need to give like fully informed consent off of what is EMDR and what isn't. So some people I have found that don't like it is where it's very overwhelming to them. So they really struggle no matter how much we're preparing or resourcing or routine before, after. It doesn't really change it for them. It's just not the right fit. And also where maybe it's very overwhelming knowing where to start. So the idea of EMDR is we go back to the touchstone memory, the first memory of when something kind of tied into the negative belief. So that can be pretty hard for people because you typically are starting with the most intense or biggest wound that's been there. So I do think it is hard for some people to get started sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so many different options. It almost feels a little overwhelming to think about them all.
Yeah, and I think, obviously, like I'm trained in this, so I am biased to think, oh, this is really, really cool, or whatever the case may be. But we're all biased. So like I'm biased to think, oh, I'm trained in this, I believe in this, therefore, oh, this must be important enough to have everyone participate in with me. So I do think that's one of the challenges there is just that sometimes people take things personally, and it's not intended to be personal, but I think sometimes we take them as personal.
Yeah. And I'll be honest, I'm not an EMDR fan just because like the sitting and not moving and being present is really hard for my brain.
Yeah, and that's a good example too, because honestly, I think a lot of my patients, they have to find what's the right rhythm for them. And so it's not always like looking at a light bar. So some of my patients uh, will do different things. So like I, for example, like use like there's sounds, there's the physical tapping, there's extra ways to enhance the eye. So I do think there's got to be some accommodation, but also I think that speaks to some of the point of like you need to know it well enough to know where the accommodations can happen, and it's still EMDR, which involves consultation and supervision and ongoing training. So yeah, I take no offense. Some of my other therapist colleagues also don't like EMDR, and they feel like aren't as wanting to be as open as Tiffany because it feels like a cult sometimes where therapists are like, what? So while I can appreciate that it has really changed my life professionally and personally, like it really has. I also can respect that it's not for everyone. Just like, old school AA is a great example. Like old school AA has saved millions of people. But old school AA is kind of like abstinence only. And so I will be honest, as a substance use counselor, that is not what works for a lot of people in 2025. But I think there are some people that need that approach and it still benefits. So I can like appreciate what that is giving and has given people, but also know that that's not maybe what my clients need or what I would need maybe if I were in that spot.
Mhm.
Um, so I think we have to have more open, nuanced conversations. So hopefully people listening can kind of hear that, like, me and Tiffany agree on so many things, and we don't have to agree on everything. And also, our wounds may need different treatment options. So as we're kind of talking over treatment options, there is no set path. And I don't mean to discount therapy, but there are so many things that aren't therapy that can be healing. Going to nature, being grounded, uh, animals, family, safe. I mean, there's the therapy's room and space can be very healing, but I mean, you just don't get to know what your breakthrough will be. So while I think therapy is very helpful, I don't think it has to be therapy by any means.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't want everyone to think I'm like on the anti EMDR cult. Like I have
Oh no.
referred people to EMDR. It's not my favorite. Not my favorite at all.
Well, I appreciate your honestly, I think we need to be able to disagree and agree civilly, but also I don't even know if we're disagreeing. You're just saying, hey, for me, that's not the right fit. Which when we're talking about being trauma informed, it is knowing, hey, this is the right fit for me, or this is not. So I mean, I think that's all I'm hearing. So I guess I take
Yeah.
no offense. I don't even know if my pulse has changed. I'm just like I think also it says something if we're gonna think through something enough to say I think differently about this, that
Mhm.
means we're thinking. So I think if we're thinking, that's great because that's going to help us find the right fit and the right answers most of the time.
Yes. Yes. Um, and that being said, like I enjoy more of the IFS parts work. Full disclosure, I am not certified, not pretending to be certified. That is really extensive training, but I do incorporate a lot of those practices into the work that I do when connecting people to their inner child, their inner critics, and other parts that are showing up in their life. Because I like functioning from the aspect that we are multifaceted, kind of like a diamond. Like there are many different surfaces and faces and parts to us, and we have to figure out how to live and accept all of those instead of just choosing to only present one.
Wow. That's really beautiful.
Mm. But that being said, um, a really powerful statement that I kind of put in my notes that I thought we could maybe pull apart or dive into is your nervous system doesn't heal from logic. It heals from consistency.
Ooh. Ooh. Consistency with what? Because I have some clients I think that could give me some sassy retorts to the consistency thing.
Yeah. So that is consistency in what you need, consistency in your own comfort, consistency in your own joy, consistency in your own protection, and consistency in your own validation.
Hmm. What if joy for me feels like not talking about these things?
Yeah. So joy is this might be a controversial approach. I let my clients define each of these for themselves. Like my definition of joy might be sitting out in the sunshine reading a book. That might sound like torture for someone else. So joy is really kind of how you define it. Like what brings you that bodily mental sensation of like I feel and can say I am like enjoying this moment or I'm happy in this moment.
Mm, wow. I also think maybe some of it can be just giving self permission to not feel well sometimes, and like knowing that it's not like a weakness or a bad thing that's happening. It's just like something you're having to go through. And I will say, I don't know, it was, I'm sure some other trauma therapists could talk about some of this, but like for me, a lot of my patients, they don't like want to have to slow down and deal with everything. So it's very triggering to them to have to sit with all of the pieces and all of the things going on. So I think that can be uh, challenging sometimes, is like having to sit and find a way to go. And I think a lot of my clients also report feeling worried about what it means to, like, are you going to sit with all of it at once? Do you have to figure it all out? Do you have to have an answer? And like, I think a lot of times that can be very triggering for people as well.
Yes. Yeah. And I think too that that's something like I harp on and people might actually get tired of hearing is that like you're human first. The human experience sucks at times. It's not always fun. And it's normal to have days where you wake up and you're like, I don't want to do anything besides be a like bed vegetable. Everyone I imagine on the face of the planet can relate to like having those days. And I wish we as a community, as a species, would recognize like, yeah, that's pretty normal. Because what we are doing on a day-to-day basis isn't exactly what we were like built to be doing.
Mm. Wow. 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 I also just want to maybe throw out that even if it's been like decades on decades for people carrying some of this, it doesn't mean you listen to this podcast and now is the time. Like I just want to maybe make sure that people know um, the timing is everything. And I'll just be honest, even for myself, like I really wasn't ready until I was in a different season, and then it was messy, but that's also something that can be normal. And so, um, I just want to encourage people like it can be hard and worth doing, but it's different for everyone. And so that's just something I hear from people sometimes, is they feel like they have to have it all sorted or all ready to go. And it's like you really do not, even
Yeah.
though it feels like you do.
Yeah. There's a gift that I love to share with people whenever, especially if they're asking me like, how do I have my ducks in a row? And it's a picture of a mama duck, and the wind is like blowing the ducks all little baby ducks all over the place. And I was like, this is my life. Like it doesn't matter how hard I try to put ducks in a row. Like life is gonna like move them wherever life wants to move them. Um, and that happens, and that's part of the process. Like there is no perfection. There is no ducks in a row. There is more figuring out of like if 10 ducks are in left field and 2 ducks are in right field, how do I function today with whatever my ducks are deciding to do?
And you don't always know. You
You
don't
don't.
always know
Yeah,
what it's going to be.
this is true. I mean, just look at this morning when like I spent what 5 minutes pre-recording because my ducks were I was still wrangling them up.
Yeah, I mean, it's always something, but I think it's just giving your body and nervous system permission, and even just um as much as I want there to be empathy, I also understand on deep levels that if you are around people impacted by trauma 24/7 or in a caretaker role or a deeper role, like I'm not wanting anyone to feel like they're being told to be that person's therapist, but it is like being a support. I think it's a different conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. An ongoing conversation for sure.
Yeah. I'm so curious at anything from your notes that you feel like we haven't been able to get into so far?
I just had some more kind of like discussion points. You're allowed to be both the survivor and the nurturer.
Wow. I like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think sometimes people try to put themselves into one specific box instead of recognizing like you can fit into multiple boxes. You can be multiple things. You can wear multiple hats. You don't have to just be defined by one thing. My other kind of statement, you're allowed to need what you never got.
Wow. That could be inconvenient. So I'm these are some heavy hitters because I'm just there's like, yeah, like that's allowed, but it also could be inconvenient to ask for and inconvenient to feel. And also I think finding a way to sit and deal with some of that will be helpful for people.
Yeah, that one's a hard one because there's a lot of that guilt and shame, those emotions that we as a society don't often talk about, if at all. And then when people feel them and experience them, they quite often box them and shove them away because what do you do with emotions that haven't been normalized or talked about?
Mm,
Um, yeah, those are kind of the big ones that kind of I had on here for pointing out, talking
yeah,
about.
no, I just want to encourage people to listen to their gut, find the right timing for yourself when some of these things work out, and then lean into them, but it can be hard to know when that is.
Yeah. Yeah. And reparenting your inner child of any shape or form, whichever modality you choose, is hard. That is the number one warning preface statement I say to any client who's coming to me to do this type of work. I kid you not, I say, this will be fucking hard. You will fucking hate me, but this is the work you're coming to do. Because yeah, this isn't easy work. If someone is telling you this is easy work, they're lying to you. At least that is my professional perception of like this type of work.
Wow. I love that. I love the honesty. We're excited to talk a little bit more about resilience next time and a little bit more about ways that we can promote resilience without being toxic positivity. So we are excited about that, but I appreciate the discussion today. And, I'll just have to find more ways to weave in EMDR uh, every single episode. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys for being here. You can always follow us on Spotify, thank Apple Music. And then we have our wonderful Patreon website where you can access lots of different resources and things of that nature. But yeah, until next time, guys.